IPO is an event in your company's history, an incredibly important one, but it is a day in the history. You wake up the next day, you have to operate as a public company under a greater level of scrutiny.
Okay, team, let's talk about people. We know that when you're thinking about an IPO, you're going to have to make sure you have all the right people in place. Give us some ideas about who those people are and what should we be thinking about?
Organizations can be at various stages of maturity as they're getting ready to get on that IPO track. And so you really need to take a step back and assess your talent. And so, the obvious answers, CFO, controller, SEC reporting manager, et cetera, but really take a look at who you've got in-house, what that talent is, what the headroom is for growth, not only for their personal growth and skill sets, but what you ultimately need to operate and scale as a public organization. And it really starts with taking that thoughtful approach to looking and assessing where you're at today, where you need to be to operate as a public company, not just become a public company, but operate as a public company, and then go from there. And the other piece of that then is also your board composition as well.
Yeah, looking at the board composition, right, you have to think about developing a compensation committee. You need independent directors for both the comp committee and the audit committee. You need to think about new disclosure requirements around cybersecurity and ESG and making sure you have perspective on the board that can address those emerging concerns. And, a little unknown fact is that public companies have to do a compensation program risk assessment resulting from Dodd-Frank. So making sure that the programs you're setting up for the public company management team don't create risk for shareholders.
Okay, well, that sounds like a lot of people and a lot of work. I guess everybody who's probably watching this wants to know, well, if I need to add that many people or that many roles to my organization, what's the right timeline to make this happen?
Yeah, the right timeline is yesterday. You need to be looking at it, look at a minimum 6 months in advance, but even then, that's going to be incredibly accelerated. You need to be looking 12, 18 months in advance to go through the assessment process, both for your in-house talent as well as your board composition, to be identifying the right people with really across 3 areas, skills, knowledge, and experience to fill those gaps. And that 12 to 18 month timeline is going to allow you to do that, to not only put the plan together, but execute on it at a more measured pace. We've seen clients go really, really quickly, 5 to 6 months, but that is 1,000 miles an hour with your hair on fire.
So I guess we've talked about the roles and we talked about the timeline. Now it probably helps for everyone to understand, why are these roles so important?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about having your house in order before someone tells you to do that. At the end of the day, if you look at building towards an IPO, we've talked for years through thought leadership and whatnot. IPO is an event in your company's history, an incredibly important one, but it is a day in the history. You wake up the next day, you have to operate as a public company under a greater level of scrutiny. Your team is your lifeblood that's going to allow you to do that most effectively. So looking at that skills, knowledge, and experience is critical to build in, so you wake up the next day, you've got the right people in place to address the risk concerns that Todd described, to be able to hit on the audit considerations and the increased level of scrutiny that you're going to be under, to make sure that you have internal controls operating, that you're hitting more strict timelines, et cetera. Your team is your lifeblood that's going to allow you to do that.
We know that a big part of the IPO process is the external auditors, and we know that the auditors are going to give really deep looks at controls and people and how people are working together to make it all happen. Todd, what are your thoughts on that when you think about why this is all necessary?
You see a common material weakness disclosed in S1s, basically saying that we don't have adequate skills at the management level, right, to meet the requirements of a public company. So getting the house in order, as Jeremy said, right, is critical to avoid that type of disclosure.
As a public company, executive comp is going to get a look. What is that called, Todd? Section what?
The Section 16 officers are the ones you have to list in the proxy.
And they're going to get a look, right?
Absolutely. Definitely from investors, right? That comes after the IPO process, but thinking about your comp programs is an important element of that readiness.
Yeah, and again, I think it gets to having somebody in your organization that has the talent to put together the proxy disclosures, and it's a pretty significant lift just to get all that data pulled together. And then typically the auditors are not going to be auditing that, but it is subject to public scrutiny. And so you want to make sure that you got it right. So it's, again, just speaks to the importance of having the right people in your organization that can do
In
the
or
lift.
out.
Well, yeah, not only on the management team, right, but also at the board level, right? You need to have independent directors. You need to establish a compensation committee. And on top of that, you need to have independent compensation consultants, right? So getting those consultants in place and getting the right guidance so that as you're moving forward, you're making the right decisions. That's critical.
What about these fast growing companies? They have their core team, but Jeremy, you talked about adding in new people. Talk about that integration of maybe some new talent that is used to being a public company and maybe some talent that you've had for a long time that is not. How does that integration go?
Yeah, I think one of the things companies have to look at that's commonly overlooked, but ones that really bake this in as part of their IPO journey are more successful, is looking at organizational change management and bringing skills and experience to bear, whether it be in-house or through a services provider that helps you navigate that. Hey, we're scaling rapidly. We've got this mission we're trying to accomplish of growing the business, but we're blending the old and the new and creating something that wasn't here previously. Well, how do we do that in a way and win over hearts and minds instead of having people resist the change? Don't move my cheese. And that's where we've seen very, very good success when an OCM, organizational change management component, is woven through that program. We see that that clients and companies are able to go at a much more rapid pace towards an IPO and do it in a more cohesive manner.
Okay, lots of people, lots of roles. I think the $1 million question, and probably the several $1 million question, is, do I build this or do I buy it? Do I outsource this? Do I insource this? What are our thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll lead off. I think you take what I'll say is the approach of the three-legged stool. And this is really the way I think leading organizations are approaching it here as we've navigated staffing disruptions through COVID and now coming out of it. And you have to look at three discrete components and how they interact. Number one, it's what's your in-house talent? What are those long-term roles, strategic roles you have to hire the right skills, knowledge, and experience to keep them on your roster in-house? So that's number one. Number two is, what are the areas that you should outsource? There's things that are going to be more transactional, rote, routine that makes sense to push to a third-party provider that can do it more consistently at a lower cost. And in doing so, you transition that risk of turnover to them. You get turnover insurance. And then number three, a more viable area in most recent years is how do you deploy digital workers? And by that is how do you deploy bots to go do some of those even more routine tasks on an automated basis? The bots work 24/7, 365 to handle some of those things that might be very not just rote and routine, but consistent month over month, and they can just sit there and churn. If you have the right blend of those three, I think you're going to be teed up for the greatest amount of success, keeping those high talent individuals on staff focused on the right strategic priorities.
Love that. Love that. Okay, Todd, I'm thinking about you and the control environment, insource versus outsource. What are you seeing when it comes to controls and Sarbanes-Oxley and internal audit? What do you see there?
We see a lot of co-sourcing and outsourcing, right? A company usually is thinking about controls and compliance at the very end of the process, unfortunately. So many competing priorities and a lot to get through. So thinking about controls, particularly when oftentimes companies can defer their adoption of SOX, right, for at least a year. They may hire an internal audit director or they may just fully co-source. But the benefit of a hybrid model is that you can move faster, right? A challenge of bringing in a full in-house internal audit team is finding talent, right? There's competition for talent out there, and one or two people can't get through the effort themselves. So you really need more boots on the ground, and that's what firms can provide as a partner in the process.
So you're seeing a real combo deal.
For sure.
Got it.